Residential Schools by Laurel McKinnons and Kennedy Vandervaart. We realized that most of the projects were just writing, so we decided to read it to you, so it's easier and all that. Okay. What are residential schools? In the 1870s, the Canadian government started to open up what was called residential schools, where only First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children attended.
The intent of the schools was to assimilate the children into becoming more whitewashed for saying.
It was mandatory that all the Indian children attended the schools. If failed to do so, the government would punish the parents, often leading to imprisonment.
The government and churches operated over 130 residential schools across Canada. The last residential school was closed in 1996. Yeah, that's only 18 years ago.
Over 150,000 children attended the schools, some as young as 4 years old.
An estimated 80,000 residential school survivors are still alive today.
The experience. Many of the children were forcibly taken from their home and were separated by a long distance from their parents. Others went to a residential school near their family, were not allowed to see them, only on rare occasions, which pretty much never happened.
The students weren't allowed to practice any of their Indian heritage, and if so, they'd be punished.
During the school year, many of the students were forced to do manual labor. After a long day at work, they were fed moldy food. At this time, murderers in prison were fed better.
Many other traumatizing experiences also came from sexual abuse and mental abuse, such as wearing soiled underwear on their heads and using students as human test dummies.
As late as 1950, it came out that 40% of the staff at residential schools were not in fact real teachers with a degree. Being separated from their children for such a long time, the adults lost touch of their parenting habits, and it made it very difficult to bond with their children that were once taken from them at a very young age.
Due to the fact that almost all of the Indian children were whitewashed, there was a huge loss in the Indian language and customs, almost making it extinct at one time.
Because of the traumatizing abuse that occurred during the residential school era, the horrible trend of sexual assault and abuse has been carried through generation to generation.
To this day, Aboriginals have a high abuse, violence, crime, child apprehension, and suicide rates.
Healing from the schools. In 1998, the Aboriginal Healing Foundation started funding counseling for residential school survivors.
In 2007, the federal government started making settlement payments and made many apologies for the schools.
The places that apologized were the United Church of Canada, 1986, Roman Catholic, 1991, Anglican Church, 1993, Presbyterian Church, 1994, Government of Canada, 2008, Roman Catholic Church, 2009. To this day, First Nations are trying to revive the culture that they once lost. Now we're going to hear an interview from Alex Dixon, which was a residential school survivor from British Columbia.
It occurred to me after hearing some other stories about other things that went on in there in terms of medical experiments, dental experiments, that it just wasn't normal, And again, I wasn't surprised because it just kind of falls in line with other things Canada does and what results from their attitudes towards us in terms of, like I say, our homelands and our holy lands. As long as we're living where we live, they'll have problems getting it, what they really want.
Do you still feel that the Canadian society is racist towards the Aboriginal community?
Oh, very much so. We experience it daily, restaurants. My nieces and I were talking about here in these stores in North Vancouver. Some sales staff just ignore us when we're in those stores. They'll see somebody else and go and help them. They'll see us and they just kind of leave us alone, and we have to go and seek people out to find out things like that. And that's pretty common. And I know I've been in restaurants over the years where I've sat down and waited for service, and other people would come in behind me and get served right away, and all that kind of stuff happening, you know. I remember visiting friends of mine in Hastings. A cop walked up to me and said, "You're an Indian, aren't you?" And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "What does it look like?" "I'm here visiting friends. You know, I went to residential school with some of these friends, and why would it, not be okay if I come here once in a while, you know?" I was sitting in a